So, since the last time I did La Femme Elite, over 2 years ago, I became a member of a polycule. Now, I've made no secret in past videos that I am asexual, and I still am. Specifically, on the split attraction model, I'm demi-romantic, which means I fall in romantic love with people whom I already know and care about deeply, my best friends and so on. And agosexual, which basically amounts to getting hot but not bothered. It's somewhere between sex indifferent and sex favorable. And I am very lucky in the reality that I have partners who understand this about me and respect my boundaries and still love me, because there is a dearth of positive asexual representation out there, the most infamous of which is that awful episode of House where they disprove asexuality. So in the interest of ace representation that actually, acknowledges the orientation as valid, I wanted to discuss Claire Kann's Let's Talk About Love, a young adult asexual romance novel which, while complicated, I thoroughly enjoyed. Let's Talk About Love follows Alice Johnson, a 19-year-old black, biromantic, asexual college student through the summer between her sophomore and junior years of college. After being dumped for not reciprocating the level of sexual attraction felt by her now ex-girlfriend, Alice is swearing off dating for good. She moves in with her best friends, engaged couple Feeney and Ryan, and is preparing to spend the summer single when she runs into Takumi, the very cute new hire at the library where she works. From there, the book covers how Alice grapples with her feelings for Takumi, the way her orientation impacts her interactions with the people around her, and the bigger picture of who she wants to be. That's my synopsis. The blurb on the back of the book is a little more focused on the romance because, well, this is a romance novel and that's how you sell it. And while I found the romance between Alice and Takumi to be so cute, I actually felt that the self-reflection was the more compelling part of the story. We'll talk about that more as I go into more detail on what I liked or didn't like about the book, but first, a moment to respect people's boundaries and limitations. So as a romance, Let's Talk About Love is sweet and fluffy, and it gives me the warm fuzzies, and that's part of why I'm recommending it. That being said, as this is a story about asexuality, aphobia does make several appearances. It's very prominent in the first chapter, and as the book progresses, it's sprinkled throughout as those kind of micro and macro aggressions that ace people face on the regular. Similar aggressions also appear in reference to Alice's race, including hypersexualization and the enforcement of racist standards of beauty and desirability. There are some interactions with friends and family members which cross the line, if not into full-on emotional and psychological abuse, then definitely into AITA territory. I will have a separate section to address at least some of these. And final serious warning, there is a scene with an attempted sexual assault, though it is not graphic. Again, I do genuinely enjoy and recommend this book. The reason I'm making these warnings is because I recognize that other people have different experiences and limitations than I do, and the last thing I want to do is put somebody in a place of trauma because they followed a recommendation on my account. If anything that I just mentioned is going to be triggering for you, by all means, go find something else to read, go find another video to watch. It's okay. No judgment on you. Seriously, take care of yourself. Thank you. For those of you who will not be triggered by these things, but want to read this book before hearing my thoughts about it, by all means, I also release you. You can go find this book at your local library or purchase it directly from Swoon Reads. The link will be in the description down below. Right then, on to the actual book. So this might be a silly place to start, but I want to take a moment to venerate how brilliant I think this title is. Let's Talk About Love is not just referencing the dynamics of romance, although that is a big part of it. It's also about the limitations and requirements of familial love, both biological and found. It's about love for oneself, and the need to be truthful with oneself in order to attain that love. And it's about love as it relates to sex, or as it's also known, lovemaking. A lot of the issues Alice has surrounding coming out have to do with how closely love and sex are intertwined for allosexuals and how to bridge that gap in communication. This is a book about love in so many forms, and I think that's especially relevant to people in the asexual community because we are so determined to dissociate love from sex. Delving into the book itself, I really like Claire Kann's writing style. In the acknowledgments section of the book, she thanks, among others, the ace community on Tumblr. Now, I left Tumblr back in 2018, which was a long time ago, and it's gone through like 9 circles of hell sites since then, but this was published in 2018, and so in reading this, I felt a sense of nostalgia. The book is entirely from Alice's point of view, and her thoughts are structured in a way that reminds me of a Tumblr blog. Heartfelt musings, information about how Alice navigates the world and what she goes through on a daily basis, snark and witticisms, fandom references. If a Tumblr blog is meant to capture a person's essence, then this writing does a really good job of capturing who Alice is. There is one downside to this Tumblr-esque format, and that's the fact that it kind of makes the pacing suffer. It feels, in this regard, like a writer's Tumblr, where they'll post a bunch of one-shots all about a character, but maybe they don't necessarily give a good sense of time progressing in between their postings, so pacing can kind of be a little choppy, a little uneven, a little rushed. The issue with that kind of formatting is that it makes doing a truncated summary of the plot a little more difficult, and I'd rather not spoil this book for those who want to read it. So rather than go step by step through the plot and everything that happens, I'll just talk about some of the things I liked and later some of the things I didn't. The biggest specific I want to go into is how much I love Alice as a character, in large part because she reminds me of, well, me, not just in my experiences as an ace person, but in general. Alice is someone who gets a lot of joy out of nerdy things, often through fandom, meta, and essays that she writes in her head or on her blog, and she's also somebody who can get caught up in aesthetics, which I can totally relate to, but she's also someone who can and does feel left behind by her allosexual friends because she feels she's missing that point of connection. Maybe that one's just a universal ace experience, no matter what our label is under the greater umbrella. I mean, I don't know, we're not a hive mind, and all of our experiences are shaped by multiple different factors, like our gender identity, and our racial and ethnic identity, and where we grew up, and how much money we had, and all of those different factors that go into making every person's experience unique. There are a few criticisms that I've seen from ace readership over this book, one of them being the idea that Alice falls into the stereotype of ace people as childlike and immature, based largely on her enjoyment of aesthetics and cutesy things, and how she sometimes expresses that enjoyment, including things like giggling. And yes, that is a fair concern to have and a valid interpretation of the text. It is not my personal interpretation, but I cannot dispute that infantilization of asexual people is a major problem, and I don't fault anybody who's turned off by this book because of that. Now, I personally didn't see it this way because when I was reading it, this was another point where I found common ground with Alice and thus viewed these as traits independent of her sexuality. I remember doing a lot of things in college that were pretty childish, in large part because I was feeling the liberation of no longer living under my parents' roof and thus being free of their judgmental gaze to act as my impulse control. So I did things like go to the Walmart at midnight and buy 5 boxes of snack cakes and eat them in a single night. I ordered a Loki pillowcase on eBay. I wore a tiara to class on my birthday because there was no one to stop me from making these decisions, no matter how silly they were. All things considered, Alice is in a much more mature place than I was at age 19, and she's not sheltered or ignorant of sex either. There are multiple instances of Alice flashing back to times when she did try to conform to allosexual expectations, and these moments explore her trauma and her anger about how much sex and love are conflated within the mainstream consciousness. This leads into another major criticism I saw, that this book is less a book for asexual people than it is for allosexual people learning about asexual people. Again, a valid concern, but is it not possible for it to be both? To illustrate that point, let's look at the poll quotes, shall we? Alice is black, biromantic, and asexual, and her relationship with Takumi is genuine and fun. A light, enjoyable asexual romance with outstanding representation. School Library Journal. Kann thoughtfully tackles what it means to be asexual and gives Alice a platform to discover who she is and what it means for her relationship with Takumi. Asexual readers will appreciate the visibility, and those, like Alice's ex, who know they poorly understand it will gain a better sense of what love without sex can look like. Publishers Weekly. I think at its core, this book is a love letter to asexuals and empathetic to the asexual experience, and that comes in large part from how immersive Claire Kann's writing is, how well she can pull a reader into Alice's mindset and experience. Now, books, like all other forms of entertainment, are not a replacement for interacting with real people who experience these things in real life. It's still important to interact with people who have been historically excluded directly, to hear them, and to support them by elevating their voices. But when it's made in a safe space where the creator can set their boundaries and maintain control of the narrative, works like this can be incredibly helpful as aids in this conversation. They are tools to help people more directly experience these historically excluded perspectives, not substitutions. I got really heavy for a book with such fluffy intentions. Moving on! Takumi as a romantic lead is almost unrealistically perfect. But that perfection is intentional, since Alice remarks upon it within the narrative, and part of their romance is her discovering the flaws that are still endearing. But when I say perfection, I mean like perfection. Like, he loves kids, he wants to be a teacher, he cooks, he's funny, he's sweet, he is apparently so attractive that he breaks Alice's scale for cuteness. And even before they actually admit they have romantic feelings for each other, he is an incredible friend. He is supportive and willing to listen, and just so good. He's the kind of perfect you would be afraid to lose forever, which is a fear I think most people coming out deal with. It requires enough trust in this person to be willing to show this most vulnerable, authentic part of yourself, and also enough confidence and bravery in yourself to be okay with the idea that you might lose this person forever if things don't go as well as you might hope. When the story starts, Alice is only out to two people, Feeney and Ryan, who have known her since childhood and are essentially her found family. She isn't out to her parents or her siblings, mostly because she knows the kinds of expectations that her family carries for her. Alice's parents are the kind to plan out their children's lives, to maximize their potential for success. And while Alice knows that these actions are taken out of love, she also knows that it isn't the path that she wants to take. So she's not just hiding her orientation from her family, but basically all of her true self. The majority of people in her life believe her to be bisexual, conflating her romantic orientation with her sexual orientation and further exacerbating those frustrations she has about how closely love and sex are connected for most people. And Feeney and Ryan, while they also clearly love her and support her, have been friends with her for so long that they also have their own established dynamic. And we'll come back to that later, but long story short, it's an old habit that's very hard to break. That's a common theme here, the reality that having a small circle results in a status quo that Alice is reluctant to break because change, good or bad, can be incredibly hard to deal with. So when she realizes that she has these feelings for Takumi, Alice seeks out somebody who doesn't know her, a counselor named Dr. Burris. And yes, I live for fictional characters going to therapy, because therapy is not a sign of weakness or failure. Bolstered by this new positive reinforcement she's getting from both Dr. Burris and Takumi, Alice has the tools she needs to embark on this journey of self-love, one that will give her the confidence to face the possibilities and challenges that come from loving someone in any context. And the rest of the book is Alice on that journey, navigating her relationships while building towards being able to express the truth of who she is. This is where I'm going to get into spoilers, so if you want to skip that part, there's the time code. And I'm also going to reinforce that trigger warning I gave about toxic relationships and sexual assaults, because that also factors into this. So again, here's the time code. Be safe, be well, je t'aime. Everyone else, we're gonna go into this. So there's a discussion section at the back of my book, and the final question that they give is, many stories include a villain. Do you think this story has a villain, and if so, who? Why? Now, were I to be coy and highfalutin, I would say that a culture of allosexuality is the main villain, and that the conflict is largely internal, driven by Alice's own psyche. But if I had to pick an outward character who acts as an antagonist, it would unfortunately have to be Feeney. Alice and Feeney have been friends since childhood, but as the book unfolds, it's very clear that Feeney has been in the driver's seat for the majority of the relationship, and that she has issues letting go of that feeling of control. Like, literally, she apparently just walked up to Alice while they were in kindergarten and declared them to be best friends, so yeah. This all comes to a head when Feeney decides that she wants to cancel the plans she, Alice, and Ryan normally have on a given night of the week to sit at home eating takeout and watching a movie, and instead go to a costume party with a bunch of people at her workplace. Now, she also uses this as a reason to meet Takumi, as she is very invested in Alice's love life, and though Alice and Ryan aren't too happy about this at first, they eventually agree because they both love Feeney and it'll make Feeney happy. Now, everything is going fine at the party at first. They all have fun costumes, they spend a lot of time watching Ghostbusters, and then Alice goes to refill their drinks, and when she comes back, Feeney and Ryan are gone, having headed upstairs to have sex. This means that Alice is now alone at a party full of people she doesn't know, many of whom are drinking. One of whom starts trying to touch her without her consent and makes racist, objectifying remarks in the context of trying to hit on her. Alice first attempts to politely refuse, and when that does not work, makes enough of a scene that other people notice what is happening and gives her the chance to escape. She goes outside to vent her frustrations just as Takumi shows up. Noticing that she's not okay, Takumi asks her if she wants to leave. She says yes, and they go have a cute little diner date together. They get takeout and milkshakes, and it's very sweet. The aftermath of this is that Feeney gets mad at Alice for ditching them at the party, and then her anger increases as Alice spends more and more time with Takumi. Alice does directly call out this hypocrisy, as there are apparently plenty of times in their relationship when Feeney has prioritized her romantic relationship with Ryan over the friendship she has with Alice, and Feeney retorts that it's not the same thing because she and Ryan are actually in a relationship. I'm not going to pretend that communication isn't a two-way street and that Alice, throughout the novel, is demonstrated to have these issues of not sharing as much as she probably should in order to get the support she actually needs. But at the same time, way more of the fault lies with Feeney. People should not have to tell you their trauma in order to get your support. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a character who has her own complex inner life and issues and probably needs to be in therapy as well. She has a very contentious relationship with her mother in a different but also not so different way from how Alice has issues with her parents. The problem is that through her interactions with Alice, Feeney comes off as really self-centered and unwilling to consider anybody's feelings or look at the world from any perspective other than her own. And rather than actually address those issues, she spends most of the story doing that waspy thing where we push all our emotions down and then just don't talk about them. Which I know is not limited to wasps, but we definitely perfected the technique. Which is a bad thing. Don't do that. Talk about your feelings. As a result, the two of them go in circles of avoidance and passive aggression for 2 months. And when they do talk, they're not really communicating. They're just throwing accusations back at each other without really getting to the heart of the issue. This entire friendship is messy and complicated, but I don't actually have a problem with that part of the story. No human is perfect, and neither is any relationship. And while it might be fun to have paragons in fiction once in a while, I think the biggest thing that people go to fiction for is a clear sense of catharsis, a self-contained story with a beginning, middle, and end that offers resolution and clarity that you so often don't get in real life. So my issue is that while Feeney and Alice do eventually recognize their mutual communication issues and make up, it doesn't resolve the plot thread in a way that gave me the sense of release I was hoping for. I got plot blocked. The reason I felt the need to make this entire separate section just dedicated to my frustrations about these characters is that this is another thing where it comes from a place of reality. There are friendships I have had in my life where I have definitely been the Feeney, and friendships where I have been the Alice. Some of those friendships are over now, and some of them have continued, but seeing this relationship play out in a story made me wonder, what I would have done if I'd had this story back when I was younger and facing those friendships and those choices. But I think the fact that I'm having those thoughts is part of why this book matters, why it's worth reading. Let's Talk About Love is a book I feel has clear value as an asexual text that can be enjoyed regardless of one's identity. I also think it has a lot of potential as a starting point for earnest, good faith debates about what asexual representation can look like in the media we consume. It's clear that Claire Kann and Swoon Reads want people to think actively about this book and to engage in these kinds of questions, especially because they do have these discussion questions in the back. So give it a read and seek out others who have read it, especially asexuals, and engage in those earnest debates, while being aware that asexual is an umbrella term and not a monolith. Like all orientations, we contain multitudes, and all of us are valid. Someone who's aro-ace might not get the same validation out of this that I did, and the same is true for somebody who is more on the side of sex favorable, since Alice seems to fall somewhere between sex indifferent and sex repulsed. If you encounter someone for whom this is the case, respect those differences, honor their boundaries, and of course, have fun. Merci beaucoup for watching. Like, share, and subscribe to combat the algorithm, tool of the Kyriarchy. You can also check me out on social media, and to sponsor the show and get additional perks, visit my Ko-Fi and my Patreon. If there's another ace-centric book, or another book by or about a historically excluded group that you would like me to review, let me know with a comment below. Thank you very much, and I will see you soon. À bientôt!